Hi guys and welcome back to the Mighty Blues. My name is of course Cameron and welcome back today to another live stream. It is another live Everton latest news, the stream where we sit down and we talk about all of the latest Everton news and rumours. We are currently on the 10th of January, meaning the transfer rumours are definitely ongoing at the moment. We typically do these types of streams a couple of times a week, especially during the transfer window, because it's not often we go a day without at least a little bit of information about Everton in those periods. We have had a significant couple of updates since the last live stream we did on Monday evening, so I thought we'd sit down and we do another one, because why not? There's more things to talk about. There's certain topics we covered on Monday, which we'll have to go over again because there's been some updates on. So why not sit down and do it all over the course of a live stream? We're going to talk about Arnold Danjuma today. His agent has been on TalkSport discussing a potential move away from Everton this month. We're also going to talk about a twist in the takeover of the football club. It seemed pretty nailed on Monday that it would be 777 who take over as the new owners of Everton Football Club. We even did a TikTok about it, discussing how nailed on it seems and trying to find the positives from that. And whilst it's still very well may happen, there has been a slight twist which may or may not have an effect on the events of things. So we'll talk about that in today's live stream, as well as a couple of other bits and bobs of news and information that have been floating around over the last couple of days or so. But before we get into any of that, I just want to touch on something that I spoke a little bit about yesterday. We did a YouTube short and a TikTok. If you don't follow us on TikTok, please do go over there, TheMightyBlues EFC. It's mostly just me putting clips up from the videos and live streams. However, if you see a video and you think, well, I haven't really got a spare hour to watch that, then you can log on to TikTok a couple of hours later, and the likelihood is I'll have put a couple of clips up from the video. So go and check us out. But we did put a little video on TikTok last night when we found out the news that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's ban for the red card he received in the game against Crystal Palace last week has been rescinded. Everton's appeal against the red card was obviously lodged the day after it happened on the Friday morning, and we heard the news last night that the appeal had been successful and Dominic Calvert-Lewin's ban will not be upheld, and he will be available for Everton's next 3 games, including that big Premier League fixture against Aston Villa on Sunday. Big news, massive news, finally some positive news, finally something positive to discuss when having a conversation about refereeing decisions and VAR decisions. I still don't quite understand how it was given as a red card in the first place. I could maybe understand it if there was no VAR and it was only looked at one time, at the pace of the game in a split second. Maybe I'd be able to understand Chris Kavanaugh's decision then, but the fact that it went to VAR and both Craig Pawson and Chris Kavanagh deemed it to be a sending off offence, for me is completely baffling. As I said last week, I'm not quite sure how a human being with a functioning brain could have looked at that and determined it to have been a red card. It doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't. And whilst obviously the justice is being served now and the appeal has been quite rightly successful and Dominic Calvert-Lewin will no longer serve a ban, I still think there's a need for further questions to be asked. It surprised me, to be honest with you. It surprised me, and not because I don't think Dominic Calvert-Lewin's ban should have been upheld, because I absolutely, not upheld, sorry, should have been taken away, because I absolutely think it should have been cancelled out, because, it was an absolutely nonsense red card. It was never a sending off offence, and for him to have been banned for that period of time, 3 games for that challenge, would have been an utter disgrace. So I'm absolutely buzzing that it was rescinded, and I'm absolutely buzzing that he is now available for the next few games. However, I am slightly surprised, because typically what happens in these situations when something like this happens and there's been a little bit of a dubious red card or there's been a dubious decision made by an official, more often than not, the PGMOL and the FA and everybody involved in it sort of doubles down on their their stance of, well, the referee gave it, so we're gonna keep the ban, we're gonna keep the decision, because whether or not you feel it was a little bit harsh, the referee gave the decision, and we can't undermine the referees by constantly taking their decisions away and telling them they were wrong. So, I'd literally just pulled up to the gym yesterday about to go in and do my workout, and I seen the news, and as I said, it did surprise me. Don't get me wrong, I was absolutely made up, because finally a correct decision has been made by those clowns that run, the VAR and PGMOL and the FA and all of those idiots. However, it did surprise me, because now what it tells us is that decision was wrong, and they've admitted that decision was wrong. The FA have admitted that decision was wrong. The PGMOL obviously acknowledged that decision was wrong. So why was it wrong? 15, 20 years ago, referees would be able to say, well, because I'd only seen it once in real time and I didn't have a good angle on it, or originally I thought he made more contact than he actually did, etc., etc., etc. And that used to be an excuse that was thrown out far too much. And, I never quite liked, because I thought it was a cheap excuse. But it was one at least that had some form of weight to it. Referees can't see absolutely everything in a game of football. Things can happen like that within a split second, and it is possible for certain details and certain context of a tackle to have been misinterpreted at the time. There's no excuse for it when you've got slow motion replays and multiple replays and 30 odd different camera angles to show you the challenge, and 2.5, 3 minutes worth of communication between two of the supposedly top level referees in this country and two of the most experienced referees in this country. That's when there needs to be more for me. If they'd have come out and they'd have said, no, we're sticking with the refereeing decision, I wouldn't have agreed with it, and we'd have all obviously been up in arms, and I'm sure we'd have been having a much angrier conversation, today. However, they would have doubled down on their decision, so there's almost not much we could have done from that point, other than further be fuming and continue to be upset and continue to, discuss how poor these referees are and how poor the system is. However, now they've admitted that it was wrong, and they've admitted that it was a mistake. I now want to know why it was given. Because, like I said, 4 or 5 days ago, 6 days ago, after the game on Thursday night, my words were, I don't understand how a functioning human brain can have watched that tackle multiple times and deemed it a sending off offence. That has now been backed up by the fact that the red card has been rescinded, and the FA and the PGMOL also both do not believe it to be a red card offence. So now, and again, you might say, oh, Cam, you're just moaning for moaning's sake. You've had it overturned. Move on now. And look, ultimately, that's probably what Everton will do. And I expect Everton to just move on from it now and not really chase it any further, because it's been overturned, and that is what it is. But I think there needs to be more. I think there needs to be more, not just from Everton's point of view, but from a general footballing point of view. I don't think we can settle at these situations where we just go, right, okay, it's been overturned, we'll move on now, because I'm not kicking up a fuss on instant match reactions after games because Everton have had one decision go against them, and I'm not kicking up a fuss for that decision to be overturned. I'm kicking up a fuss at the absolute state of the officiating levels in this country, the absolute state of the way VAR is used, the state of some of these officials that turn up week in, week out and make catastrophic mistakes week in, week out. So yeah, great, it's been rescinded, but I'm not going to sit there now and go, oh, nice one, thanks for that, because it should never have been given in the first place. It's like me walking onto the pitch and a player walking past me and doing nothing wrong, and me giving him a red card, and then it getting rescinded, and me going, well, you've got nothing to complain over because it got rescinded. No, that's not quite how it works. We have got something to complain over: the persistent, shocking level of officiating in this country. For me, clubs and obviously it's Everton in this case, but in a more general case, I think clubs need to go further than that and say, well, hang on, well, if the FA and the PGMOL have determined it to have not been a red card, as well as pretty much every other person on the planet when it happened, why were the two most important people who gave the decision, why did they believe it was a red card? Where's the audio from that to prove that there's nothing sort of, there's nothing dubious going on there? Because we've since had ex-managers come out and talk about, certain referees as having problems with Everton Football Club. So you've got ex-managers coming out and saying, well, I'm not surprised at that decision because, he's had an issue with Everton Football Club for a while, talking about, what's his face, is completely Graham, what's his name? Not Graham Paul. Graham Pawson. Craig Pawson, sorry. Not Graham Pawson, Craig Pawson. Discussing that, Craig Pawson has had an issue with Everton for a while. And then you've got that decision being made, which we all knew at the time was a nonsense decision. And now you've got the FA and the PGMOL coming out and saying, yeah, we agree that shouldn't have been a red card. So what's the next step then? Is the next step just to allow them to referee Premier League games again at the weekend and get away with it and nothing be done? Or is the next step, well, we want to know why it was given as a red card to prove that it was just a mistake and it wasn't anything, other to be discussed. It won't happen. Everton will just sort of, take it and move on from it and forget about it because they've got the decision that they ultimately wanted, which is the rescinding of the red card, and that's fine. That's fine. We've spoken a couple of times in the last couple of weeks about how I think Everton at the moment are just trying to keep their head a little bit low, just trying to, sort of not say too much, not do too much, and not argue too much because they know that the Premier League will quite happily use us as a rod to beat, and ultimately they'll use us as an example. They won't dare say anything to Liverpool or Man United or Manchester City or Arsenal or Chelsea, but if Everton's dare to stand up for themselves, then they'll more than likely come down on us with another fine or another points deduction or whatever else it might be. So, I understand it from Everton's point of view, but as I said, for me, I think there needs to be another step now as to, well, why was that given? If everybody else in the world can tell me that it wasn't a foul, I can see with my two eyes that it wasn't a red card, then why did them two believe it was a red card? And now that it's been rescinded, even more reason is to find out why they believed it was a red card, because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But anyway, it's been rescinded. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is now available for Everton's next 3 games, which is a huge, huge boost to the squad. Another bit of news we found out earlier on in the week, Monday night it was, is that if Everton are to beat Crystal Palace in that FA Cup third round replay, they will go on to face the winner of the replay between Luton and Bolton at Goodison Park. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can see through Palace, which, as I said, I expect us to turn up and win it on that day, because I think also Goodison Park, the performances we can put in and we should be putting in consistently at Goodison Park, like the Newcastle performance, like the Chelsea performance. We haven't done it enough times this season, but we know that we're capable of it, and if we can do that against Crystal Palace, I think we'll win the game. And then, Luton or Bolton, a decent draw. I think that replay is at Bolton Stadium, so who knows? Maybe it might be Bolton, a lower league side, coming to Goodison Park. But yeah, another one of them early round of a cup competition. We could have got easier, but we could have got harder. So you take it and you move on. But firstly, obviously, getting through against Palace is the biggest thing. I'm not even focusing on Bolton or Luton at this current moment. Even though, as I've said numerous times, I'm not quite sure I can be arsed with it, but there you go. We'll be playing the game, so we'll be talking about the game, we'll be watching the game, and we'll be at the game. So it is what it is. Anyway, on to the news then. I just wanted to discuss those couple of bits before we moved on, because I know I've spoken about them in YouTube shorts and stuff, but I just wanted to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation, especially about that Dominic Calvert-Lewin situation. On to Arnold Danjuma then, who has been in the news over the last day or so. We'd obviously heard some murmurs prior to this that Danjuma was slightly unhappy with his lack of game time. We'd heard some murmurs that he could potentially leave Everton this window to go and join somebody else on loan in order to try and get more game time, but it had only been rumours at that point. It hadn't been anything too sort of reliable. It hadn't been anything too convincing to suggest that he would be leaving the football club. It was just sort of murmurs and rumours that he could potentially move on. What we did hear was yesterday afternoon on TalkSport, Arnold Danjuma's agent had confirmed that he was in talks with Lyon over a move. He actually had a full interview about Danjuma. Michael Moses-Jarman, his name is, he said on TalkSport, look, he's happy and settled at Everton. He's got a contract, so it's only respectful that's the way the conversation stands. And then he did go on and say he's not getting his minutes at the moment under Mr. Dyche, and what's best for his career is to play football. So yeah, there's been interest and conversations ongoing with the Lyon. It has been reported in the media. That's why I'll confirm it. So, straight from the horse's mouth almost there. There's not much more reliable it can get, other than Danjuma himself coming out and saying those words, than his agent coming out and saying it. Again, this doesn't surprise me. This doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I think he's obviously somebody that we had high expectations for when he came in the summer, with everything that had happened previously with his move to Tottenham and in January when we were supposedly be bringing him in. He moved to Tottenham. It didn't go well there. He come in the summer and, everybody sort of forgave him. He was talking in his interviews about how he should have come to Everton in the first place, and, he loves the sound of the football club. He thinks the fan base is great, and we'd almost sort of hung our hopes on Arnold Danjuma to be a really important player for Everton this season, partly because I think he was only the second signing we'd made at that time, and it was during a time in the summer where we weren't very confident we were going to make many more. I know there was a few Evertonians that were confident that we'd make 4, 5, 6 signings, but there was a lot of us that felt when Ashley Young was the first player to walk through the door after a couple of weeks on a free transfer that we probably wouldn't be doing much business, and we didn't do an awful lot of business, to be fair. But when Danjuma come in, a lot of people I think felt that he may be one of the only attacking players to come in, so there was a lot of backing for him, and as I said, there was a lot of expectation that he'd play a lot of football and that he'd have a big part to play in Everton's season this season. It obviously hasn't quite worked out that way as it was. We did make a number of other attacking signings, although they haven't had particular massive effects on the season either, in the likes of Chimiti and obviously Beto. Jack Harrison has come in as well, which I think is an important point, because Jack Harrison ultimately has come in after Danjuma and has come in to play in the same position as what Danjuma would be occupying. So yeah, listen, there's absolutely no hiding it. He's not getting a lot of game time at the moment. He's had more game time over the last couple of games or so than what he'd had previous, and maybe that's because the squad is stretched and the manager hasn't really got much choice, or maybe that's because, in recent times the manager sees something in him and thinks that he's doing enough insane into one, being able to start games of football and come on with, at least half an hour to play in order to affect the game. He come on against Tottenham and was very unlucky in that game to have not got a goal. Could have had a hat-trick on another day. He obviously played against Crystal Palace as well and had a couple of big opportunities that he maybe should have done better with. But as I said last week, in the games of late that he's been featured in, he's been lively. He's been exciting. He's not being scared to get on the ball. He's not being scared to try and take a man on. He's not being scared to, have a go and get at goal. His decision-making and his final product in the final third is something that needs improving. That goes without saying, and I think we've also seen that over the last couple of games as well. As much as he's been much better in terms of his willingness to get on the ball and his willingness to attack and get at players, he's also showed his his need for improvement in those areas in the final third, and certainly when it comes to decision making, because he had a couple of moments where, had he have just squared the ball across instead of going for the shot himself, we could have quite comfortably scored a couple of goals. So yeah, he's doing better than what he had been doing. There was a period at the beginning of the season where he was coming on and not having any effect on the game whatsoever. He was barely touching the ball. He wasn't really doing much. He wasn't really contributing to anything. And then there was obviously a period where he just wasn't getting picked. He wasn't coming off the bench. He wasn't being given that opportunity. The manager was bringing on players like Chimiti, bringing on players like Lewis Dobbin before Danjuma. So he's definitely had a little bit of a roller coaster time at the football club in the few months that he's been here, and as I said, he's definitely not one that has knocked the door down and almost sort of showed the manager that he deserves to be in there week in, week out. However, football isn't a sport that allows you to just have 11 players and get through a season winning comfortably every week with just a squad of 11 players. You need a squad of 16, 17, 18 players, and sometimes that means players won't play. Sometimes that means players will be frustrated at game time. Sometimes that means players will ultimately not be happy with the fact they're not being picked. According to his agent himself, although he admits that they're in talks with Lyon over a possible move, he also admits that Danjuma is very happy and settled at Everton Football Club, which is quite interesting because I'm not quite sure. There's a little bit of a juxtaposition there, isn't there? You typically, when you hear an agent come out and say, "Oh, my client is in talks with another team," it's typically because they're not settled and they're not happy at Everton. Maybe he is happy and he is settled, but he's just wanting to go and get some more first team minutes, and that's fine. But he doesn't seem to be the type of player that would kick up a fuss. He doesn't seem to be the type of player that will, sort of sulk and just sort of walk around the training ground or Goodison Park with a face on and with an attitude because he's not being picked. All the videos you seemingly see him in, he seems happy, he seems like he's got a smile on his face, he seems like he's enjoying himself, he seems like he's got a really strong relationship with a number of the rest of the squad players like Garner Gay, who he seems to have a really strong relationship as well. So yeah, again, I think there's a risk here. I think there's a risk here, and whilst I appreciate and I understand that he hasn't had a lot of game time this season, and in the game time that he has had, he hasn't particularly blown anybody's skirts up. I understand that and I appreciate that, and I get that. He cost £4 million in the summer. The only money we spent in the summer was on his loan fee, so you do expect more from him. And as I said about the January transfer window a couple of days ago, the beauty of this transfer window is anybody that Everton do bring in, they're coming in with absolutely no expectation whatsoever, because the expectation going into this transfer window was that it wouldn't be a busy one. The manager, the director of football, they both told us that don't expect much to be going on in January. So anybody that we do bring in is coming in almost with in a perfect scenario, because there's no expectation on them. There is no, there's a natural expectation of playing for Everton, work hard, battle, give 110%, put yourself about. But in terms of, we're not likely to make a signing this window that we all go, right, I expect him to step in and get 10 goals. I expect him to step in and do X, Y, and Z, because, we know that the players we'll be bringing in this month will likely be loan players or deals that we can get done on the relatively cheap. So that expectation level is already sort of on the floor. When Danjuma come in, because, as I said, he was the first attacking player we'd made, and because of all of the things that had happened the previous year with Tottenham, the expectation level was that he was going to come in and he was going to do really well and he was going to smash it and he was going to have a huge impact. He hasn't. However, for me, I think Everton's policy in this window should be, we will not be letting anybody, and I mean anybody, go without replacement, because we cannot afford to make this squad any thinner. We've already seen over the last couple of weeks with the absence of Abdoulaye Doucouré how big of an impact that has had on this team, how big of an impact that has had on this squad. And whilst Danjuma mightn't be getting a lot of game time, and whilst Danjuma mightn't be pulling up any trees when he's on the pitch, he is a member of a squad, and he is a frequent member of a squad as well. Although he mightn't be coming on every week, he's in that he's in that on that team sheet every week. Whether he's on the bench, whether he's in the starting 11, whether he's a used substitute, an unused substitute, he's on that team sheet every single week. And as I said, I think he's done well of late. He's certainly improved of late compared to what he was doing when he was coming off the bench, 2-3 months ago, when he was having literally no impact on the results or the performances whatsoever. Now he's actually having some form of impact. Okay, his decision making still not great, and he's still not ultimately doing it with his final product, but he's getting at players, he's looking lively, he's having a go. And the reality is we simply can't afford to weaken our squad anymore. And if we are to allow Danjuma to leave, and ultimately this comes down to Danjuma, doesn't it? It comes down to Danjuma, and it comes down to Everton. Danjuma might turn around to Everton and say, I want to leave, I want to go and get more game time, I want to go and play for somebody that is going to start me week in, week out. And Sean Dyche might go, well, no, because A, you're contracted to us, and B, we haven't got the squad depth to allow you to leave without replacement, and we're very unlikely to be able to get a replacement in that position who can offer what you can offer in the next couple of weeks. So there is still a decision to be made from the football club who ultimately the player is a contract to, and if it doesn't suit Everton, and I can't stress this enough, if it doesn't suit Everton, we absolutely shouldn't allow it to happen. Even if he wants to leave, even if his agent is going on TalkSport and saying he wants to leave, if it doesn't suit this football club, then we shouldn't allow it to happen. And as I said, he doesn't strike me as the type of player that would spit his dummy and sort of create a negative atmosphere in the dressing room. He strikes me as the type of player that would just get his head down, knowing full well that he's only on loan anyway, so in the summer he'll be leaving. But if you were to say to me, right, Cam, we've got this wide player, this winger who can come in, who's going to come in on loan or come in on the cheap, etc., in January, and he's going to replace Danjuma, and Danjuma wants to leave, then it's not as big of an issue, is it? But like I said, for me, this month is an absolute no-go for allowing players to leave without direct replacements. And by that, I mean direct replacements. I don't mean Scott McTominay to replace Amadou Onana because he's not a direct replacement. I don't mean Hannibal to come in and replace Danjuma. I'm not talking about one in, one out like a busy supermarket during COVID. I'm talking about literal direct replacements. Hannibal isn't a direct Danjuma replacement, so therefore that I'd be extremely disappointed with the football club if they allowed Danjuma to leave and not bring in a wide player or a winger or a wide midfielder or whatever you want to call him. And yes, Danjuma, as I said, has not pulled any tees up recently, and yes, he's not had a huge impact on our season, but you never know when you might need him. You never know when you might bring him off the bench and he might step up. He has scored a couple of goals this season, by the way. Let's not forget, he scored a really important goal against Sheffield United to get us our first point of the season. And had we have not scored that goal, it would have been another game we'd have lost, and who knows where we'd be from now without that sort of stability of that point. I remember how relieving it was when we got that point, and I'm not saying, don't mean relieving in the sense of, that's a brilliant result, because it wasn't. We should have won the game, and obviously we were still searching for our first win, but the fact that we'd got a point on the board was a moment we could go, do you know what, let's build from this now. At least it's not a negative defeat we're having to talk about, and he was a big part in that. He's obviously scored in the cup games as well, so yeah, ideally I think he'd stay at Everton. He'd get his head down. He'd maybe work a little bit harder in training, because there's listen, the manager clearly doesn't fancy him for one reason or another, and I can only assume that it's because he's not impressed with what he's doing in training. Work a little bit harder, get his head a little bit down, work on his decision making in the final third, and then see the season out with Everton, and then obviously he leaves in the summer anyway. But we spoke yesterday about risks, huge risks, risk versus reward factor, and yes, 70, 80 million. The risk of letting Amadou Onana leave the football club and not being able to replace him, worth the reward of having 80 million quid in your bank, however, being a championship side. And these aren't extremes that I'm discussing here. These are very possible outcomes. We spoke on Monday about Amadou Onana. If Everton lose Amadou Onana, yes, we might have a shitload of money in the bank, but we may not be able to replace him this month. Therefore, we're missing a midfielder. We're missing, a key element of our squad that completely disrupts the team. Few negative results. We get relegated. And then all of a sudden, that £80 million has not only got to go to replace Onana, but it's got to go and replace Jordan Pickford. It's got to go and replace Dominic Calvert-Lewin. It's got to go and replace, X, Y, and Z, and whoever else will leave the football club in that circumstance, Jared Brandthwaite. And I'm not saying that would happen, but for me, if you were to say to me now, Cam, give me a percentage of how likely you think Everton are to go down, I would say really, really low. And I'm talking really low, under 10%. Under 10% for me, because I just think we'll continue to pick up points and we'll continue to win games where those other sides won't. If you were to say to me, right, I take Amadou Onana out and I don't replace him, and your midfield stays exactly how it is now, but without Onana, what's your percentage? I'm going 40s, 50s. And that is the risk. Are we likely to get a bid of 60, 70, 80 million for Onana in the summer? Yeah, probably, because he's still incredibly young. He's got an international tournament to go away on, and if he even does moderately well there, then his price will, at the very, very least, remain as to what it is, if not increase. So the risk outweighs the reward for me, and therefore I wouldn't have Amadou Onana going anywhere this January for any amount of money. Talking about the Danjuma situation, again, I don't think the risk is as great as that, because I don't think Danjuma is as important as Onana is, but it's still a huge risk to allow a wide player to go who can provide, can score goals in this league. He's proven that before, can create chances, can come on and cause himself a bit of a nuisance, even if that doesn't mean he scores or assists. That might open up an opportunity for somebody else to score or assist. I think it's a huge, huge risk. And as I said, my mantra for Everton in this window is nobody leaves this football club unless there's a direct replacement ready to come in. And it's as simple as that, because we just can't afford to weaken our squad any further. And even that ideally isn't the case, because if you let one out and bring one in, then you're not strengthening your squad. You're just exactly where you were. And we already know our squad needs strengthening. So, yeah, the idea of letting anybody go, whether it be a hugely important player or whether it just be a sort of squad player like Danjuma, without replacing them, is something that I just can't get behind. I really can't get behind it. And as I said, I understand and I appreciate Danjuma's point of view, but Everton have ultimately got to be honest, and that honesty is we can't afford to let you go. And if you want to get more game time and you want to play more frequently, then you work that little bit harder in training. And maybe it's not a case of him working out. Maybe he's just not a Sean Dyche type of player. Maybe Sean Dyche just doesn't fancy him. Maybe Sean Dyche looks at McNeil and thinks, well, he works a lot harder on the pitch and is defensively a lot more consistent. Maybe he looks at Harrison and says defensively he can give a lot more. Maybe Danjuma is working as hard as every other player at the club. He's just not the type of player the manager wants. And that is quite possible. That isn't an unlikely circumstance, is it? And if that's the case, then I do feel slightly sorry for him, because there's not much more he can do. But at the end of the day, we can't further weaken this squad. We absolutely cannot further weaken this squad. It would be madness, absolute madness to do that. So yeah, we'll wait and see how this one progresses. As I said, the quote saying he's happy at Everton, and where is it? Look, he's happy and settled at Everton. He's got a contract and it's respectful. That's the way the conversation stands. Yeah, for me, I don't think there's going to be any pushing from him. I don't think there's going to be any persistence to get out the football club. I think it's just a case of maybe he would like to, but if it does, it's got to suit everybody, and it just doesn't suit Everton. Because, look, and I know people will say, oh, get him gone and bring somebody else in, this, that, and the other. You're talking about whether or not he's done well this season, and I agree he hasn't. He hasn't done what we expected him to do. He hasn't reached that level we expected him to do. Whether or not the manager particularly likes him or doesn't like him, or feels like he's his type of player or doesn't feel like he's type of player, Arnaud Danjuma is a proven Premier League goal scorer who can come on and can cause issues against Premier League sides. He's got pace, he can beat a man. He's not perfect, his decision making isn't great, but he's proven he can score goals, and he's proven he can beat a man, and he's proven he can cause himself a nuisance at times. Where are we going to get a player who can offer that exact same amount of quality on loan in January? I just don't think we are. And again, for me, that means that he ultimately stays at Everton. Anyway, moving on, as we just spoke about, Dominic Calvert-Lewin has had his 3-game suspension lifted. We heard from Josima Football over the course of the last 24 hours or so that a consortium of American investors are readying a bid to buy Everton in the expectation that 777 partners are unable to complete their takeover of the club. Now, obviously, we spoke on Monday about Alan Myers and the BBC and various other journalists coming out and talking about how how 777 are only awaiting Premier League approval now. They've got approval from the FA. They've got approval from the FCA. They're literally just waiting Premier League approval before they can completely take over the football club. They've obviously got an agreement with Farhad Mashiri. They've obviously pumped a lot of money into the football club in loans. We read on Monday as well that there's been another loan of quite a considerable amount of money from 777 to Everton Football Club. So for anybody reading this statement about a consortium of American investors and getting excited and getting a little bit, sort of, like I said, a little bit excited about it, I wouldn't just yet. There would have to be an awful lot go wrong for 777 to not be the new owners of Everton Football Club now. Now, yes, there will be other bidders, or yes, there will be other interested parties, and that is all this statement says to me. All this statement says is if 777 partners are unable to purchase Everton, i.e. if they're not given the clearance from the Premier League, then there is a consortium of American investors who are readying a bid. Now, one word that is used in this statement is in the expectation that 777 are unable to complete their takeover. I think that's probably just a case of misusing a word. I don't think there's many people out there that expect 777 to not go through with this now. As I said, the FA are seemingly okay with it. The Financial Conduct Authority are seemingly okay with it as well. They've got an agreement with Farhad Mashiri for the start. They're the only people with an agreement with Farhad Mashiri from what we know, and they've obviously pumped an awful lot of money into Everton in loans. So if they aren't to buy us, then we're in even more debt than what we were prior to them, coming onto the scene. So, yeah. Again, I didn't really pay too much attention to this, to be perfectly honest with you. Emma says just on this, what else can he do if Dice doesn't fancy him? Why keep him if Dice doesn't use him unless he's desperate? Because we might get to a desperate point this season. It's very possible that McNeil, who is currently injured, by the way, Jack Harrison, who's played a lot of football recently, Decore, who's currently out injured. It's very possible that we get to a stage where whether or not Sean Dyche loves Danjuma or doesn't, he relies on him to come in and play, as we've seen in the game against Crystal Palace. So that's why I'm, again, in an ideal world, 11 players would be able to play 3 times a week, every week with no issues, but that's not an ideal world, is it? So you need a squad of players, and unfortunately in that squad you're going to have players that you're not necessarily keen on, but they can come and do a job, and maybe he's one of them at the moment. Yeah, as I said, I'm not particularly paying too much attention to this, to be perfectly honest with you. I just don't think that I at this point just can't see a world in where 777 don't own Everton Football Club. The amount of money they've put into the football club already in loans, and yes, that doesn't guarantee that they will be buying Everton, but it would mean that Everton would have to pay those loans back, which isn't ideal. And yeah, as I said, just with everything else, the exclusivity agreement, the fact that this has been going on for a while, the fact that they've already had permission granted from 2 of the 3 corporations that they need it from, and apparently are expected to get Premier League permission over the course of the next week or so as well. So it doesn't even seem like that final box is far away from being ticked. And yeah, as I said, I just think it would have to be a monumental fuck up from 777 for them to not purchase Everton at this point. And yes, the Premier League could turn around and say, we don't give you permission, and that is a possibility, and this has taken much longer than it usually takes for permission to be given, which does leave the question as to why is it taking this long. However, we've already seen, as I said on Monday, we've already seen enough examples over the course of the last 6 months that the Premier League aren't the most capable organisation in the world. They don't make the correct decisions, and quite frankly, to without beating around the bush, they don't know what they're doing. So, people holding their hats on the Premier League to all of a sudden get a brain and employ a load of people that know what they're doing, I think is a little bit far-fetched. They've already shown that they haven't really got a clue. They're just interested in the money. So if 777 can provide the money, I don't really think the Premier League will have much of an issue. So yeah, it's interesting. it's definitely interesting because it's a report of a consortium of American investors preparing to buy Everton Football Club. But as I said, it would take a lot now for 777 to not be the new owners, I think. And yeah, I just can't see that not happening. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they won't get that permission from the Premier League, and maybe we'll be sitting here in a couple of weeks' time talking about an American consortium owning Everton Football Club. Who knows at this point? According to Fabrizio Romano earlier today, Everton are monitoring 2003 born talent Tom Fellows at West Bromwich Albion over potential summer move as he's out of contract in June. 777 partners like the player and could consider to sign. And could consider to sign and then loan Fellows. I don't know much about him. From what I've read on social media over the course of the last few days or so, he's not played an awful lot of football whatsoever. Obviously, he's only 20 years of age, so still incredibly young. Very highly rated by West Brom fans. I've seen a lot of West Brom fans talking about him today and talking about how highly rated he is and how much they want to keep him at their football club. He's obviously out of contract this summer as well, which would mean he'd come in for free. It also means that if he is any good, I'm sure there will be an awful lot of teams chasing his signature that are in better financial positions and league positions as Everton are. As I said, there's a lot of West Bromwich Albion fans absolutely raving about him, and if that is the case, and that's to be believed, then there will be a number of Premier League clubs that will be wanting to get his signature in the summer. Yeah, as I said, let's just wait and see if this one progresses. Whether or not we hear anything about it this month, I don't know, because he's still obviously a West Brom player. Maybe Everton are thinking, well, if we get to June and he's on a free, we've got no chance of getting him, because there'll be lots of other sides in much more lucrative positions that will be interested in him. However, if we pay a little fee now, or we try and make this happen now, then we might be able to get in there first, and then we can say to West Brom, listen, you can have him back for the rest of the season, but we just want to sign him up for next year. Who knows? I'm not even sure if that's possible anymore in the Premier League. I'm not even sure if you can sign a player and loan him out in the same season. I don't know. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. As I said, I don't know an awful lot about him. I don't think he's played an awful lot of football, even in the Championship, but definitely seems like an exciting talent and somebody that will be being monitored by a lot of clubs. So don't expect much to happen on that just yet, even though it is Fabrizio Romano, and I know people get excited when Fabrizio Romano tweets Everton information. I'd just hold off on the excitement on this one just yet. We have had an update on Hannibal Mabry of Manchester United. We spoke about him on Monday and the possibility of him joining Everton. The latest update is, according to the Liverpool Echo earlier this morning, Seville and Everton are close to agreeing a loan deal with Manchester United for Hannibal. It is now down to the player which team he decides to join. Yeah. As I said, we pretty much covered this on Monday, didn't we? There's a couple of different options for Hannibal. Seville at the moment aren't doing particularly well in the in La Liga. I think there's something like 17th. I think there's a lot of issues going on at the moment with their fans not being happy with the way they're performing. I've seen an interview with Sergio Ramos last week as well, where he's having a verbal altercation with a fan as well. So it's not like it's all, it's all pretty and perfect over in Spain for Seville. It isn't. And, I understand that if you put the two clubs side and side, Seville-Everton, you might think generally, oh yeah, well, why would he not go to Seville? But as I said, it's not as pretty and perfect as what it may seem. There's still obviously a huge club, so there's still that attraction there. The attraction of going to play in a different country and develop yourself in a different country is also huge as well. He's obviously a Tunisian, so he's not like it's not like he's an English-born player and he's thinking, well, I'm not really sure about that. He obviously is no stranger to playing abroad, although he has been in this country for a long time. Again, for me, and I'm not just saying this because it's my football club, but Everton makes sense for me for Hannibal. It just makes much more sense. He doesn't have to move house. He's in the same area of the country. It's not even like he has to move area, never mind country. He's in the same area of the country. He still be accessible to all his family and his friends and his ex-teammates at Manchester United if need be. And he's playing in the Premier League, and he will be playing, because if he comes to Everton, he will be playing. The only reason I could see him joining Seville, well, two reasons. One of them being he actively wants to go and play in a different country, but the other one, and the big one, being if he thinks he gets more, if he thinks he'll get more game time in Seville than what he will at Everton. And I'm not quite sure that would be the case. Don't get me wrong. I think he'd probably get a fair bit of game time over in Spain, but he will play an awful lot for Everton over the course of the next few months as well. And the whole move in itself just seems much more suited for everyone. For Man United, because if he goes to Spain and does really well there, what does that tell him? Doesn't mean he's going to be able to come and do well in the Premier League. Whereas if he goes to Everton and does really well, then that gives them an indication as to where he is in terms of their setup. It's obviously more suitable for Hannibal in terms of being in the same area, not having to travel much, not having to move home, etc., etc. And it obviously benefits Everton because we're bringing in a good, young, talented player who could offer something to the squad. But I'm going to say that because I'm an Evertonian. I'm sure if we went onto a Seville fan channel, they might have something different to say about why he should go there. So, yeah. Ultimately, this will just be a case of wait and see, won't it? This will just be a case of wait and see what happens. Ultimately, it's his decision. I still have the gut feeling that he will join Seville, just because I think, I don't know, I think he might see that as a more exciting project, but I think it makes more sense for him to join Everton, and I think people at Manchester United will be trying to convince him to join Everton over Seville because it makes more sense for them as well. But apparently, it's down to him. It's his decision, and I'm sure we will find out that decision over the course of the next couple of days or so. Moving on then, according to Paul Joyce, Everton have appointed one of the UK's top barristers for the club's appeal against their 10-point deduction. Lawrence Rabinowitz, KC, had been appointed to Everton's legal team for when the case is reconvened in the near future. He has been nicknamed as... Let me just get this nickname up because it's absolutely boss. He has been nicknamed as Super Silk. Everton appoints Super Silk to their legal team ahead of appeal against 10-point deduction. Now, I think the phrase silk is in reference to something to do with being a barrister or a lawyer or some form of legal person. I don't think they've just made up a name because he's wearing a suit that is made of silk. I think silk is probably a phrase used in that world that I'm just not sort of known to, because when I first read it, I thought, what a weird nickname. It sounds like a posh nickname for Spider-Man, doesn't it? Super Silk. What a strange nickname. But then the more I read, the more I started to believe that silk is actually a term used in that area of work, and the word super is just because he's good at that area of work. But anyway, we're getting far too sidetracked with the phrase Super Silk here, which was just a nickname used in a headline. This is really positive, really, really positive. Look, it goes without saying, after the last 30 seconds of conversation we've just had, I don't know anything about this fella, but I don't know anything about any of the UK's top barristers, and I don't know anything about any of the UK's worst barristers, so you could have put one that is one of the worst in the country, and I still wouldn't have had a clue. So, the fact that he is seen as one of the top barristers in this country, the fact that he's got a nickname with the word super in, not that that means anything, but it's positive. It's positive. You want the best people on the team. You want the best barristers. You want the best legal representatives. If we're coming up against the Premier League, who are this huge organisation with all of this power and all of this money, you want the very, very best people to go at them, and the very best people to stand up to them. And there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of reason as to why Everton should feel aggrieved by that 10-point deduction. And there is a lot of things to suggest that that 10-point deduction was harsh and should never, ever have been given out. And hopefully having someone like Lawrence, I'm just going to call him Lawrence, on the team, who is obviously a very well respected and highly thought of barrister within this country, having somebody like him on the team is only a huge benefit, because he'll be able to pick those pockets, he'll be able to have those conversations, he'll be able to produce that evidence to suggest that we have been harshly done by. So, yeah, really, really positive stuff there. Again, unfortunately, whenever we talk about players, it's very, very easy for me to Google, whatever player we're talking about, how many goals they've scored, how many appearances they've made, how many assists they've had, how old they are when their contract expires. It's not quite as easy to do that with barristers, so we'll leave that there. As I said, I don't know an awful lot about him, but it's positive because he's seen as one of the best barristers in the country, and we want the very best on this case because it's important that we get our points across that this isn't on. So yeah, happy days. And then finally, according to Dom Shaw of the Echo, not the Liverpool Echo, the Northern Echo, he has reported that Everton are amongst the number of Premier League sides that are interested in Sunderland winger Jack Clarke. Pardon me. Teams like Bournemouth, Burnley, Crystal Palace, Leicester, Southampton, and there's a couple of Championship teams in there. West Ham and Wolves all are interested in the signing of him. Again, I'm not paying too much attention to this at this current moment. Firstly, because, as I said, we will have a lot of transfer rumours in this window and in every window, which end up coming to nothing. And secondly, because any rumour where it states Everton are interested or monitoring the progress of X player from X team, and then underneath it says Bournemouth, Burnley, Crystal Palace, Wolves, West Ham, Leicester, Southampton, Leeds are all also monitoring him. I just don't pay much. Basically, what they're saying is there's a load of teams in and around the Premier League and the top half of the Championship who are interested in bringing in this player who's doing really well in the Championship. We are at that point. There's no point in me talking too much about Jack Clarke. I've seen him play a couple of times. He looks exciting. He looks like an interesting little player. But I'm not going to sit here and talk about him for 15, 20 minutes whilst it's just an interest. I'm interested in going and swapping my car for a brand new Bentley Continental, but it ain't going to happen, so I'm not going to even think about it. But yeah, I suppose it's an interesting rumour. The Blues says, wow, really? You aren't giving us a scout report? I thought better of you. Yeah, sorry, mate. Listen, the scout report is, his nickname is Super Silk. And that could also be a nickname used for Spider-Man. And Spider-Man is one of my two favourite superheroes ever. So, there's your scout report. He's a belter, because he sounds like he could be in some way interlinked with Spider-Man, and he knows what he's doing. So I am now much more confident Everton will beat that case than I was when I woke up this morning. So there you go. There's your scout report. I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, we are going to leave it there. If you have enjoyed this one, please do leave a like. We will be back over the next couple of days with more news if and when it breaks, and obviously with the game preview to that game against Aston Villa, so don't forget to look out for that one. If you have enjoyed this, please do leave a like. It does only take a second. Don't forget to subscribe as well. We are aiming towards 9,000 subscribers, only a couple of hundred off it now, so if you could hit that subscribe button, it would be it would mean a massive amount to me. Go and follow us on TikTok, The Mighty Blues EFC. Go and follow us on Twitter at MightyBluesYT as well. And yeah, big thank you all for watching. Big thanks to everyone in the live comments. If you're watching this a YouTube video, leave your thoughts down below and we'll get involved with as many of them. Big thank you. Up to toffees. See you after.